Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I have two guests today, and they both have a past that includes some grief in their lives, and they've taken that to a project that they work on together, which is very exciting, and we'll hear about that in a bit. But we'll start with Amanda. So, Amanda, if you would just introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the story of where the grief came into your life.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having us, Christine. Happy to be here. My name is Amanda McKoy Flanagan. I'm an author. I'm a podcaster. I'm a motivational speaker. I am a blogger. I do it all. Communication. It's my deal. I live in Castle Rock, Colorado. I moved out here 8 years ago with my family from New York. And we're just extremely happy here. We love it. We love it here. And moving here was one. I've had multiple experiences of grief in different forms. I'd like to talk about grief not just as the loss of a loved one or a pet or divorce. Those seem to be the most common forms of loss that we identify as grief. But I think major changes or loss, any change really can bring feelings of loss that have to be grappled with, whether it's a good change or bad change, because just something is changing, some kind of familiar experience, behaviors, walking, going to your local supermarket, whatever it is, things just change, even if it's a change that you want, a new job or something like that. So moving out to Colorado was one of my emotional breakdowns that resulted from grief that I didn't know was grief. I got sober in 2006, and thank you. And I experienced, well, that in and of itself came with its own grief, getting sober, right? Having to kind of not go to the parties that I used to go to and hang out with the people that I used to hang out with and go to the bars and the places that I just kind of built an identity around. So that came with its own grief. And then I had a boyfriend who died when I was 8 months sober. And that was sort of my first real experience with that feeling of grief. But I didn't allow myself to stay in it. And that kind of all blew up years later. I'll get to that. But that kind of shook me, rocked me to my core, let myself feel it for a month or so. And then I was like, oh, I'm good. Just moving on. Moving out to Colorado, then again, 9 years later, right? So being in recovery and doing work and self-reflection does not protect you from having these intense emotional upheavals, due to just life experience. We're not, rendered white as snow and protected in every way. So moved to Colorado in 2015, and I have another emotional breakdown a year later. Like I said, just the familiar people, places, and things that I just felt like a fish out of water. Culturally, New York is very different from Colorado. And yeah, I had to learn kind of new customs. I had to learn maybe some new words. I heard some words out here that I had never heard in New York. Just the way people were. Very nice. It was very different than New York, going to the supermarket and, asking for something. And the guy just kind of like drops what he's doing and walks you to the aisle, it just service, like everything was just very different for me. Not necessarily good or bad, just different. So I kind of hit the floor again in 2016. I'm 10 years sober at this time. I do some work around that. I get deeper into my recovery work. I get deeper into my meditation, my conscious contact with my higher power. I try to deepen that relationship. And then a couple years after that, my brother died from an overdose. He had moved out to Seattle in 2006, and we tried to have an intervention for him, and that just didn't work because a lot of addicts and alcoholics are extremely charismatic and can sell ice to an Eskimo. And that was my brother, Jeremy.
Yeah.
And we walked into his house trying to talk him out of going, or at least go to rehab first. Like, don't move to, Seattle where you know nobody with a major drug addiction. And somehow we all left kind of high-fiving and smiling, and then looking at each other and saying, how did that what just happened? Like, how did that happen? And that is just kind of, that's a difficulty in dealing with people in your life that's addicted. Like, we kind of have that personality, a lot of us. So in January of 2018, I tell my husband Jeremy's going to die this year. And it wasn't really that prophetic, because he was living in his car for 2 years, and he had moved in, I guess in 2017, he had moved into a small garage slash shack in Ocean Shores, Washington. And he was living kind of not too far from a flop house. And it just was getting worse and getting worse. So he was getting these little mini heart attacks. So I knew that, he was probably on his way out. And 2.5 months later, I get the phone call from my mother. Jeremy died. She's screaming. It was extremely traumatic for me. I spent about 45 minutes pacing around my dining room table. My brain was working to try and preserve itself while I just kind of figured out my next move. And that experience rocked me in a way that I was completely unprepared for. I was in bed for about 3 months. All I could do is go to my recovery meetings and cry in my bed and take a bath every few days. It was just not. I was in a bad way. Thank God for my husband, who took care of our 2 girls. They were 4 and 6 at the time. So again, 3 months later, it's June. I love the summer. I'm done with the grief. I don't want to feel it anymore. I say, I'm good to go. I was in counseling. I started, grief counseling right at that time. I was actually set to start that counseling before he died. We never had our first session, then he died. So it was kind of perfect, because she is a grief counselor. She's also a couples counselor, which is where my story is heading. So, 3 months later, I'm back in action. I'm back involved with my sponsees and my groups, and I'm doing some, service at my church, and I'm just kind of trying to live again. And 2 months later, so at 5 months after Jeremy died, I go to a concert, Pearl Jam concert, it was mine and my brother Jeremy. If you know Pearl Jam, there's a song called Jeremy, and that was sort of what we bonded over. Like most of our lives. I started listening to them when I was like 11 or 12. He was like 15. So we kind of 14, 15. So we always had that. Our first concert, Pearl Jam concert, we went to together. So we always had that. So I go to a Pearl Jam concert in Seattle. It was called the Home Shows. It was 2 nights. Me and my best friend, one of my best friends from New York, were committed to getting the front row. So we went a day and a half early and slept on the sidewalk outside Safeco Field, which is now called something else. But it's a baseball stadium, and we get front row, which was awesome both nights. And so I meet somebody there outside of my marriage, and I had this connection with this person that I just completely baffled me, just blew my mind. I came home and told my husband, I don't love you. I don't think I ever loved you. I think my decision to marry you was just logical. It was just a really good decision on my part. And at first he's like, what are you telling me? Like, what? Like, what are you saying? And we were kind of like paralyzed for a couple weeks. And he goes, wait, do you think maybe Jeremy's death is playing a part in this? Like, your brother just died 5 months ago. He's like, I know grief can do wild things to people. Do you think maybe that's what's going on? And I said, maybe. And I'm willing to look at this, because I know now I'm 12 years sober. And now I know that whenever something's presenting on the surface, there's usually something deeper going on underneath. It's usually not what is on the surface. So we go to marriage counseling. In addition to, I jump harder into my 12-step program. I start meditating. I just kind of pulled out all the stops. I did a whole bunch of things. We also did something called imago relationship therapy. And I get to this understanding and realization through the help of my therapist that I'd been living with what I call the great myth. And that was a story that I'd been telling myself up until this point, 38 years of my life, that everybody leaves, everybody hurts me. So I better protect myself. I better put on that emotional guard, because when they do leave, hurt me, or die, which I know everybody dies, but suddenly, unexpected, you might be not as crushed, right? If I can walk around like that. And that's a complete fallacy. It's not possible. It's not ever possible to plan out how you're going to feel, when something just soul crushing happens like that.
Let me ask you this. So,
Yeah.
your story is reminding me of a lot of different things. But I'm curious to know, and not to have you put on the spot, but did you have a positive childhood? Because a lot of times those feelings of, I got to protect myself, I got to whatever, comes from growing up that way, where, people weren't there for me, or they left me, or I didn't feel supported, or someone. So I'm just curious if any of that is part of your background. Because like I said,
Yes.
I know it's super common.
Definitely. So this is a generational dysfunctional message that has been passed down through, I believe, centuries, to protect people. And I think it definitely served a purpose back then. Like I talk about in my book, I use the example of like a mother with like 8 children, 150 years ago, dad's off at war. And it's all she can do is to take care of these kids. She cannot let herself feel that grief. Maybe dad dies, right? And she's got to now keep these 8 kids alive. She's got to, keep them fed and healthy. So she doesn't have time to feel. So she shuts it down. So
Yeah.
I think it was a survival instinct
And
that was then.
you could probably add to that, of course, infant mortality, which was much more common then. We've lost our children, whereas today, if you lose a child, it's a devastating, horrible thing. But back then,
You would just expect it to like move on.
I'm gonna have 10 kids, maybe 4 will survive, kind of a mentality. So that might be part of it too.
Yes, that's a great point. That's an excellent point, because yeah, it's just a sign of the times, right? And it's just how things were, that like you can't lay in bed for a year over every child that passes. Like you just kind of know this is going to happen, so you just shut that part down, because we're human beings. So it's not like women and men who lost children back then processed it differently. I mean, I guess they felt the same, but they processed it differently. So right. So that the same feelings were there. They just shut them down and repressed them. So yes. So through the years, that's gonna take a toll, especially in our society now, where we don't need to live like that. We don't need to walk around surviving
Right.
the entire time. But yes, my childhood was not peachy. I mean, it wasn't terrible. My parents were not alcoholic. They were not abusive. There were a lot of mixed messages, I would say. I lived in a bit of a perfectionist home where I don't know, I never really felt like good enough. I felt kind of like if I get the B, then maybe the A is better, type of thing, but and I was a very good student, and a lot of those ways that my parents parented us served me very well. I am actually very grateful for my childhood, and I don't think that I would have been who I am today. Like, for instance, I have hypervigilance, right? I also have some sexual trauma, not it was outside of my family unit. And I think that trauma created this hypervigilance that now serves me, because I'm very observant. I can pick up on people's energies. I can, so I believe that all of these things that were instilled in me that I used as really, that did not serve me, especially when I was out there drinking and just growing up, and, created low self-worth. It created feelings of inadequacy. Now I'm using those things, flipping them upside down and saying, how can that serve me? Right. Like I put out a reel the other day on my Instagram about self-doubt. I try, so how can that serve me? Like, because I believe all these things are in me for a reason. I believe my childhood happened to me for a reason. I believe this incarnation, I mean, I believe in multiple, past lives. This incarnation, I feel like it's to learn certain lessons. So I have to look at that stuff and say, how am I supposed to use that? What am I supposed to do with it? So when I fall into self-doubt, it keeps me humble for a little bit. I shouldn't stay there. I'm not going to stay there, but I'm going to acknowledge how I'm feeling. I'm not going to just, talk myself out of it, or I shouldn't feel this way, or I'm going to accept it. I'm going to feel it, become aware of it, and then say, but how can I use that to serve me, and then get rid of it? Right.
Yeah.
So
learned a lot about yourself, obviously,
Yeah.
in the process. I mean, the grief process for sure, but
Yeah.
I have many friends that are in 12-step programs, and I know that they learn a lot about themselves going through the 12-step program. So that is probably all has worked in your favor, actually. And I noticed on the write-up that you sent in, you said that your brother's death and your grief for that set you free. So can you kind of explain what that means? What does that look like? What does that mean?
So what I learned through my therapeutic process of healing, my relationship with my husband, my I don't love you was really, I'm afraid you're going to die. That's what I learned. I was protecting myself from future loss because I was walking around with this mentality of everybody dies, everybody leaves me. Now Jeremy dies, and guess what? They're right. They're right. Everybody does. It becomes true. The myth becomes true. So I unconsciously pushed my husband away. And because he's 12 years older than me, he's a 9/11 first responder. He has chronic respiratory illness. He gets sick quite often. So, it still happens. I can manage it better today. But back then, 5 years ago, every time he would get sick, I would just go into this tizzy and I didn't really know why it was bothering me so much. And my therapist helped me to identify it was this messaging that was drilled into me. And then the perfect storm, then Jeremy dies. And then this other person shows up in my life. Right. And Jim's PTSD as well created this space of a lack of emotional intimacy. And I was fine with that when we met because I was a year sober. I had no idea how to enter that space. I wasn't interested in being vulnerable. I don't even know if I knew what the word vulnerability meant at that point. Like it just wasn't even in my stratosphere of emoting. Um, so it worked until it just didn't work. And then Jeremy dies, and I need that. I don't really even know how to receive it. I don't know how to give it. But this person shows up and, something, just this spiritual connection, which turned out to just be a spiritual awakening, and I believe my brother Jeremy set that up. I believe he just kind of was like, use that person to wake me up and say, Amanda, you don't have to live like this. You can break the cycle. Your daughters do not have to live like this in this emotional self-protection because you're really shortchanging yourself on your life here.
Yeah.
Like you're walking around, you're this sober woman, you're, supposed to be, growing into the highest version of yourself. But there's this block here. There's this huge block here that's preventing you. And my book is called Trust Yourself to Be All In. So this whole thing culminated in a book. And it's called Trust Yourself to Be All In. And what it means is all in with you and the comfort of finding comfort in all of your own emotions so that you do not have to fear future pain, future trauma, future loss, whatever's going to come your way, that
it's going to come. It's like you can't avoid it. So
it's life.
yeah.
It's life. I mean, I know it's coming for me. I'm 43 years old. I
Yeah.
probably am only halfway through this deal. So I know there's going to be maybe a little less, hopefully a little less. So I know there's going to be more knocking on my door. So instead of the fear of, I'm not going to be able to handle it, I'm going to end up in a psych ward, I'm not going to be able to take care of my kids again, like I couldn't when Jeremy died. I have this awareness now and this belief in myself that, yeah, I may hit the floor. I may, but I'm going to get back up because I've done it before and because I know how to take care of myself. And because I know the professionals to reach out to, I know the friends to lean on and call. I have my recovery program. Like I know that no matter what, I'm going to be okay. And then once I can get that level of comfort in my own skin, and self-worth and just trust and belief in myself, then I am free to be all in with others, right? Because it's so true. Can't love anybody else until you love yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
My experience for me was the pathway to get to that unconditional self-love for myself. And then I can really be all in with others. So that's sort of how I was brought to freedom. Because even, what looks like a curse at first turns out to be a blessing. And I wouldn't call my brother's death a blessing. But the experience I had afterwards, meeting this person and coming home, I was like, what is going, like, not like, what is this? Like, I love my husband and my family. And what is this? Right. So that was like the curse part. And it just turned out to be a blessing. And the both of us have gone, my husband and I have gone through some major healing. He has done his work on his PTSD because that was playing a big part. We were not happy for years before this whole thing happened. It wasn't like it just happened, boom. Like I had been asking to go to marriage counseling. His PTSD kept getting worse. It was affecting our kids. So the book is not about saving marriages. It's about healing the parts of yourself that need to be healed so that you don't bring them into the next relationship.
Right.
Because ultimately we're attracting people really
Yeah.
because our soul is yearning to heal from whatever that relationship is bringing up.
Yeah. And then I know eventually, and we're going to talk about this after we talk to Ginny, that you started with the podcast and so on. You and Ginny ran together. So let's move on to your story, Ginny. So if you would introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about, what you do and so on. And then we'll talk about kind of some of the loss that that you've experienced that's gotten you to where you are today.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. It is such a joy to be here with you today. And my name is Ginny Oliva Smith, and I am a wife. I'm a mom. I am Amanda's partner on our podcast, Soul Rising. And I also started and own a company called the Flippin' Phoenix Furniture Rehab, where I am taking pieces that are headed for a landfill, many of them which are just built amazingly well and, might have what might appear to be no more worth, but just a little under the surface there and some repair and some attention and some love. There's this beautiful piece of furniture that has a second life, maybe even a third. That's what I've been doing since March. I had been in the corporate world, corporate sales for about 18 years. And we've had quite a few things that have happened, in my lifetime. I think that kind of helped sway me to really stop and evaluate and ask myself the important questions about if I'm happy, how I'm spending that energetic currency. And I ended up leaving that career in March and doing this full time, which is terrifying and also invigorating and amazing. But one of the things that kind of helped really solidify that was the loss of a very dear friend, really more family member of ours, my husband's best friend. They've known each other since they were 5 years old. My children knew him as their uncle. But he was one of many. I mean, honestly, my whole family has gone through quite a bit of loss. And now that I think about it, this has been going on for a while. I was thinking back to where some of those first experiences of loss and grief might have come in. And quite honestly, the first very impactful one, I think back to when my grandmother passed away. My mom's mother passed away at the age of 61 from scleroderma. And it was a very fast and, painful and kind of destructive disease that took her in a way that was pretty difficult. And at that time, for my mom, I got to watch. I was only about 10 years old at the time, 11. And that really sent my mom into a tough place. They had a tough relationship growing up. I think my mother's entire life. And her passing finally kind of sent my mom into a difficult place, which kind of led also, my parents weren't in the best place, but I think that was the final, before the avalanche of things just kind of crashing, my mom finally going over the edge where my dad was like, okay, I'm done with this too. So we had lost my grandmother, and my parents, I'm the youngest of four, and had been married 22 years. So kind of started with that. We watched this loss, this grief start to be at least pulling the thread. My mom, who suffered from addiction, suffers from addiction. I come from a long line, both, on my mother's side and my father's side. I too am somebody who works a 12-step program, need to be back in it, doing it more, but it is something that helped me to get sober. I went to rehab in 2016 for alcoholism. And looking back at that, as well as Amanda talked about, getting sober in itself was a sense of grief. I had been living, I think, my life in a way, I wasn't the person who got a DUI or ended up in jail or anything along those lines, but completely had lost myself for sure. And had gone through a period of, I never missed work. I never, I was that person, but yet in the meantime, I was drinking alone, drinking to manage my stress, drinking to manage my anxiety, which I've come to realize I've had the better part of my life. I think having to come to terms, there's been grief in the sense too of really having to come to terms with a lot of the truth about maybe my childhood and the way that I grew up, and a lot of the masks that we're able to put on. It's an interesting thing when you finally are brought to your knees, like Amanda said, where you suddenly are realizing like, wow, I've been using all these exterior things to help me manage, this level of anxiety and these different things happening in my life. And there was definitely grief in that, because I think that coming to the realization of like, wow, you really don't have this together, and you really aren't the person that you've been able to kind of put the mask on, and put the armor on. It's actually not who you are.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really high level of grief at that time, because everything just shattered,
Yeah.
the sense of self.
Yes. Yes. No, I can relate to that on a very personal level. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about there. So kind of,
Yeah.
the image you put out there for people that you think, who they think you are, because that's the image you're putting on. But then at the end of the day, it's actually not. And
That's exactly right.
for some of us who did that for years, I think it's even harder when you come to that realization, because it's kind of like your whole identity is not what you thought it was. And
That's exactly right.
and I know I'll speak for myself here, but the fear of anybody knowing that was also a thing for me. I don't want you to know that, right? I don't, which is all part of, you got to put that mask back on, right? So yeah, so I totally understand what you're saying.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes, 100%. So that was a big thing. And I was raised in New Mexico, which I love, and I have so much love for so many of our family members are still there. But my husband and I both had realized at a certain point too, it's this ongoing, it's difficult to watch, because so many of the people we love that are there, and just the city as a whole. We came from Albuquerque, massive struggles with addiction, massive struggles with homelessness, massive struggles with crime. It's just this ongoing cycle. So we have, and as we were preparing to even talk to you today, I was thinking about the amount of people that we've lost to physical death, and it's far too many, and I look at it, and a lot of it has had to do with complications to addiction.
Yeah.
A lot of it. So, fast forward to 2020, a few other people that we had lost. I had been sober, at that point, a couple of years, but my brother's wife, she had a younger sister who her name was Stephanie, and she and I were, probably a year and a half apart. We'd grown up together. Our siblings married one another when we were teenagers. So we knew each other all those years and grew up. I called her my sister. And she also was suffering from alcoholism. Similar deal, she's not somebody who was a bum under the bridge, Yeah. She was this beautiful esthetician, stunning girl. And you just wouldn't have known that things were as dark for her as they were. And she'd been struggling with that for quite some time. And prior to her, actually, another very good friend of the same circle, her name was Carla. So this is my sister-in-law's best friend, who also I grew up around my entire life, pretty much from the time I was 12, 13. We lost her in March of 2020. And that started, what seemed like so many people we would lose over the next few years. But she suffered from alcoholism, and same thing, respiratory therapist, mother of a beautiful boy who was 5. And no one knew she was struggling at the level she was. So we end up losing her in March of 2020. And just 60 days later, Stephanie, who also was suffering alcoholism, passed away as well. Died at home alone. So we had these two major, very impactful losses in one family. My niece and nephew, my brother's children, these were their aunts, so to lose both of them that quickly into the same thing was very earth-shattering in a way. These two beautiful women who were under the age of 50, who left behind so much. It caused me to go through a lot of feelings too, because I was sober at that time, of not just the loss of them, but also this survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
In a way, because why had rehab and, some of the 12-step programs I had been involved in, why'd they work for me? Why was I still here? And here were these two women that I loved who were not much older than me. We were within a similar range,
Yeah.
and they didn't make it.
Well,
So that was,
you're bringing up a good point that isn't the subject of of my podcast, but I do want to make sure I throw this in there for anybody who's
yes,
listening at this point in time, that I think a lot of people think that alcoholics are the vision of the Skid Row person,
yeah,
and they are so, that is so not. I mean, yeah, there's a few, but I mean, this is so not the truth. It's the people who you look at and work with every day who are
yeah,
quote, unquote, normal, functioning,
yes,
successful, whatever. That's, you have no idea what's going on underneath of that. So I think it's a really important point. I just wanted to throw out there, even though, again, it's kind of like, yeah, it's important to know, because I've had many people in my family with addiction and
oh
alcoholism.
yeah,
And my own father, I mean, he was very successful. I mean, he had a great job. Everybody admired him and so on and so forth. And he died at 59. So, it's like, you see that, and you're thinking, wow,
yes,
how is that a possibility? Like, well, it's a lot going on that you didn't see or you didn't know. And I appreciate your comment about why did that work for you and not for others. So I think that's also part of it too. I know, yeah, with some people, maybe it just doesn't, I don't want to use the word stick, but it isn't the thing for them right there at that point in time. Right. So
sure,
yeah,
yeah.
that. So yeah.
And
So
a lot of it is that surrender, right? Which those of us who've been around any kind of 12-step program,
yeah,
it takes such a willingness to be at that point. And sometimes people don't, necessarily get there before their bodies are finally done with this journey.
it's a
And
yeah, it's a place of vulnerability, and a lot of people that's what they're using the substance for, is to cover that vulnerability. So now I got to give that up.
terrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I know
it
it.
is absolutely terrifying. So yeah, that was the beginning. I mean, that sense of that, um, definitely a very concentrated level of grief.
Yeah,
My husband and I left New Mexico to come to Colorado. I live in Colorado as well, in Castle Rock. I don't know if I'd mentioned that, but we came here with the idea and the intention of, as much as we have so much love for where we came from, my husband's in education, and we kind of saw the writing on the wall too, and thought, if we want to give our kids a different opportunity than we had, there's a very good chance, not that we couldn't get it in New Mexico, because there's people, I have I have a niece who just got her doctorate, a nephew who's going to, he went to School of Mines and an engineer, but there's a lot more struggle that's happening there. And just to tell, there's the two people I just told you we lost, my brother's best friend in the entire world prior to both of these gals. We lost to suicide, but it was suicide in conjunction with mental illness and addiction.
yeah,
So we've had so much of it, and I know I'm not the only one. There's a lot of people that have gone through this kind of loss,
yeah.
with folks. We've, continuing to go on. We just this last June, as I had mentioned, had lost my husband's very best friend. He was diagnosed with a very rare form of a genetic form of cancer last August, and no real rhyme or reason. They have their thoughts on why maybe he had this type of cancer. He never touched a cigarette in his life, and by the time he had gone in after having some shoulder pain and a few different other things that he fell off with, he had stage 4 lung cancer, and it had spread everywhere, and he was 48 years old at the time.
Yeah.
So watching him in this situation of really having to walk in and have no idea that this is the kind of diagnosis he was going to get. A very hardworking, very strong, amazing individual who didn't do anything. He wasn't smoking packs of cigarettes every day. This was life that had just occurred and happened and can happen to any of us. Really had a massive impact on many of us around because we were watching him almost have to wrestle to the ground every day that he could, because he was told, you're probably not going to make it through the month. This is somebody who worked so hard his entire life for retirement and to be able to travel and take his kids to these places, and his wife, and do all these things. And it was very fast.
You're making me think of a book, and if you haven't heard of it, it's a good read. It's called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And
I haven't heard of it.
It really speaks to that issue of, I've lived a good life. I'm not a smoker. I've not, killed anybody, blah, blah, blah. And yet here I have cancer at terminal cancer at 48, or, what did I do to this? That kind of sense of I don't like the word fair, because it's hard. Fair is a very different thing, but it's not fair. Why me? Why me? Why not that person over there who's doing that or whatever, who's a bad person, but instead it happens to good people too. So great read
Oh,
to
yeah.
kind of help you get your grip on that part of it. For
Yes.
anybody listening who's wondering, why on earth me?
Why does this happen?
Why me again? Why not somebody else? Right? Share the wealth.
Exactly.
Oh,
Or why the person, why the person that's in your life, that because this, this man had so much integrity and so much character, and somebody who had so much love and influenced
yeah.
so many people around him, that even from the outside saying, gosh, this is not fair that this would happen to this individual of all of us, like he's the last person that would have deserved to have that.
Yeah.
Not that anyone deserves it, but he really was a great human.
Yeah.
And there was a lot to be said in how he handled that, and the level of grace and like the heart of a warrior. I've never gotten to watch a human spirit in front of my face, and not for any other reason than he wanted to make sure, he was at peace with all things before he left here. And he fought really hard. And I don't even think it was because he was afraid. I think he fought really hard to give more time for everyone else to process what was happening. And it was transformative. And like I said, for my husband, it was one of his first times. Really, he's lost both of his parents, but he was very capable of keeping himself extremely busy. He coached high school football during both of those deaths, and he'd never really sat in the grief. He was at football practice the day both of his parents passed away, jumping right back in. Amanda talked about her early situation where she had lost a boyfriend, and jumped in a month and a half later to life. Like, okay, I'm good. Let's move on. My husband had done that. And this time around, it was really interesting because it was summertime. He's not coaching anymore. We're here in Colorado, and he had the time to sit in it. And it was the very first time he said he felt like it wasn't just his best friend's death he was processing, but he finally was allowing himself to process the grief of his mother's death, his father's death, and and some of the other people that we've lost. So that was really transformative for me in a lot of ways. It caused me, as we got to spend time with him, he was up here doing trials and different things. And I was watching him, like I said, do with what the moments he had, and really watching him make them count and want to make them count. And it caused me to really reflect on how I was spending every bit of my days. And I had a wonderful career, in sales. I was in lighting sales, and it did amazing things for me, and I built great relationships. But I stopped to ask myself, okay, I commute into Denver. I come coming back from Denver. I'm running around all the time. I, make good money, but like, how much of me am I leaving here? And how much of me are my kids really getting? They're getting the leftover of that, and most of my energy is going into something that it's a paycheck. And it wasn't necessarily their job, but I don't think, necessarily the people that I was employed by or those around me, and it wasn't their responsibility. It wasn't going to matter too much to them if I was, I'm kind of a number in a way. But not that my kids.
You both have kind of hit on something that I think is also pretty darn common in someone who's undergone some kind of a especially grief from young people dying, whatever, that kind of stuff, is that whole live in the moment thing. So, why am I in this job where I have a 2-hour commute one way? And, even though I'm making good money, am I present for myself, for my family, and so on? And life can be short. You never know when your time comes. So
you never know.
Comes up a lot for people that I talk to who've gone through, traumatic events, is that they really realize, really, I may not be planning for that retirement and where we're going to go away and travel the world. That may not happen. And therefore, not to live in fear and whatever, but just to say, I'm going to prepare for that. And so I should enjoy myself today too. And maybe that is going on a vacation that maybe I thought I was going to put off for a few years, but that way I'm going to enjoy it. So, I had diagnosed with breast cancer 2 years ago, and that really gave me in my mind of, wow, I've got, kids and young grandkids, and I really need to think a lot about how much time I'm spending on work, even though again, making good money, loving what I do, but it's like, I don't want my kids to remember that about me. So that's kind of where I got to. So I think it's that awakening really does happen in times.
It does.
And so on. So yeah.
And really just reflecting on how even in a day, for me, it was like, okay, well, even what I'm choosing to do as a career, which again, super stable and all of those things, but how much of myself am I even leaving with the world? It's like, yeah, I'm building relationships, but is there more that I can do. And, the desire to really think about, I really want to leave as much as myself here. As Amanda says, and her daughter talks recently about the word essence, right? Yeah. How much am I leaving here? How much am I leaving? And how much are my kids going to have of me when I'm gone? Am I leaving enough of me here that they're going to get through that grief in a healthy manner, and that they have some love, and that they have some things to hang on to as I'm gone? Because that's what we leave, right? And that's what we take with us, is that love, as what I believe. Yeah. So I think that's kind of those have been the things for me. That's what led me to, quit my job in March and start doing furniture full time. Which was a bit of a crate, and a lot of people, they would look at that and say, that is insane. What are you doing? But at the same time, I've never felt more like I'm living every day for each day, and that I'm doing something that I really care about, and that I am adding something and leaving something positive with the time I've spent for that day. I also have the ability, to take my kids to school, or pick them up from school, or be here when school is out. Which, a lot of that, I think the final things of that were brought on by our really dear friend, really family members passing. It really brought all of that together in a way that it would give me the kind of momentum to say, hey, I really want to do something different. If I've got a year left, or I've got, 50 years left, that would be a lot. But my grandmother just passed away. She was 94. So if I can hold myself together, there's a chance. But really just paying attention to how I'm spending this energetic currency every day. And a lot of that was brought on by the loss of these loved ones that we've had.
I call that taking charge of your legacy. It's kind of what I refer to that. Kind of like you own, who you are. And I want to know that when I leave this world, that I've left back people remembering positive things about me, whatever it might be, even for you, a piece of furniture. I mean, whatever, those kinds of things where it's like that's your legacy, and your legacy wasn't going to be working in that other job,
Right. Or the time, that's like, for me, my kids get a happier, healthier. I lost weight. Like, I feel like I brought my neurological system back to a normal place. I lost like 28 pounds. I'm walking outside. I'm getting sun. My kids are getting a different version of me than they were when I was coming home exhausted, eating crap food all day, and living in this state of fight or flight. They're getting a different version of me because I'm spending the time doing something that I care about. And I feel like even more so, that's the most
how that will carry through when they become parents themselves, should that happen. And same thing with you, Amanda, with your kids learning those lessons, and therefore seeing healthy, and therefore, okay, I'm going to, because we all, this is no surprise to anybody, we repeat what we went through as children. We repeat that lifestyle. Right. It just keeps going and going and going. It's a never ending thing, and somebody breaks the cycle. So you both definitely are cycle breakers. I can tell that right now. So I'd like to know, you started this podcast. I'd like to know what inspired you to start this podcast. I mean, where did that come from?
So, I think Ginny and I, our main commonality in both of our stories is that we've used our pain and turned it into purpose. And a friend of mine has this quote a lot. Actually, I was looking it up. It's a title of a book. I haven't read the book, but she says, "Don't waste the pain."
I love that.
So my mission is to take the pain of my brother's death and everything that ensued, and I turned that into the book. And that was more of just a divine inspiration. I actually didn't sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write this book. It just came to me. I was running one day, and it was just like this massive, like, knowing, like, you're writing a book. Like, it just kind of came out of nowhere, because I had been thinking about, because it was 2020, talking about like traumatic experiences that wake us up and force us to find our purpose. I had been thinking about, what am I going to do now? My kids are getting older. I always did work until I got pregnant, and then I stayed home raising my kids. And I was like, okay, it's time. I have a master's in social work. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll go into policy side of things. I'm into climate change and stuff like that. And then I'm just running one day, and I get this like massive download of like, you're going to write a book. And then this stuff just came flooding out, and the book was born. And from that, Ginny and I, while I was in that writing process, we were having lunch one day, and she actually was like, hey, look what I did last night. She like pulled out her phone, and I think it was like on Anchor or something.
Yes.
And she recorded like a little like a little, I don't even know, like a
An
musing.
intro to a podcast.
Yeah, it was like just like her musing about things, like, hey, anybody can do this. Like it was just like her just talking. And I was like, oh wow, yeah. I was kind of told that, like, in addition to, like, for my book marketing, maybe I should start a podcast. And then it just like made sense that if I want to get my message out, our message out to the most people, it's through a podcast, right? It's through writing, it's through speaking, it's through like how many different modalities can I use to spread this message? And so then, like, maybe 6, 8 months later, when I was actually ready to do it, I was like, hey, Ginny, will you, because we were having these great conversations. Like Ginny and I just always have these awesome conversations. And we were having a great conversation during that same lunch where she told me she did this podcast and recording. And so I came back to her later and I was like, hey, and then she was like, we should just do one. We should just start a podcast. So then, like, later I was like, hey, were you serious about that? Because we just we always say, like, when we're together, like, we should be recording this. Like, somebody should be like, we're saying some really cool stuff, So, so I was like, are you serious? Were you serious? She's like, yeah, definitely. So then we just kind of put our heads together and we said, well, what are we trying to say? Like, what is our message? What do we want to say? And our podcast is called Soul Rising, SOL. I'll play on the sun. And Ginny's New Mexican roots, and
yes, and also just light, right? Like that
light, sun,
that light, that internal light we all have.
And then our souls actually rising after death and grief and whatever, all that kind of stuff. And so our show is about how human emotion works to either connect us or disconnect us from ourselves and others. Because ultimately what, COVID 2020, it really affected the both of us in a very great way. We were both extremely disturbed and still are over the division in society. I mean, think about 2020, that was wild. We had the whole pandemic and then we had a crazy election. It was just like, boom. Like, and I feel like, if the spiritual powers that be did not work overtime in 2020 to wake us up, I don't know what else it's going to take. So Ginny and I's whole purpose is to try to bridge people back together by understanding we have these common emotions, everybody, with all different walks of life, but underneath that, we have this universal connection through really just being spiritual beings, having a human experience, and then how all these different emotions come up and play together, and how we have to connect to ourselves first, and then we can connect with others. So it kind of takes from it's kind of like an offshoot of my book. It's kind of like a jumping off from one of the messages of my book. It's that healing ourselves has the power to heal the collective. Because we could say, oh, look at this lawmaker's doing that, and this one's doing this one's doing that. And they want us to feel powerless, I believe. They want to divide us, the fear, the whole thing. But ultimately, we have so much power that we're not tapping into just by healing our own energy. And we feel very strongly about that. So that's sort of where it started.
That's how long have you had the podcast? Since
March.
Oh, so just this year. Wow. Okay. So do you interview guests, or is it just that the two of you talking, or what? How does your structure work?
So far, it's been just the two of us talking, and we take subjects. A lot of it will come from the blogs that Amanda is writing. But I also, quite honestly, it tends to be quite a bit of a reflection of what we're just going through in life at that time. If it's not something coming from a blog that Amanda's writing about, there's been times I will develop the subject of an episode based on life happening at that time. We do plan to start having guests at this time. It's been super cool building, kind of upon the conversations we used to have, sitting back and having lunch and being outside and finding ways to connect to each other when the world seemed like, well, first off, we were all separate anyway. But even in our own homes and separate, like, the level of division was just stifling to both of us. So we really started building upon just even that reconnection and talking about all these things that kind of are resting underneath that fear, right? We've all been in this crazy, whether it was this virus and we had all these other things and businesses shutting down and the economy getting terrible, all the things based on fear. So for us to be able to kind of connect with one another as human beings and really talk about that, we wanted to build on that quite a bit, and get that out there and share that. Our goal here is, though, probably within our second season, we will we will be doing a mix of our shows together still, and also having guests on as well.
Yeah. Well, for those of you with young children, COVID had to be even harder, and I thought about that a lot during those years where, couple years where kids not being able to go to school and the lack of socialization and all that. Just as a teacher myself, really, really broke my heart and made me think about the damage that was done to kids during those years that may not ever be fixed, if you will. So I like the idea of kind of discussing, because I know people listen to you are probably thinking, oh wow, they're talking about something that completely relates to me. I mean, just talking to the two of you here, you're saying so many things that I relate to, right?
Right.
You know, to listen to that and go, oh wow, okay, well, I hadn't thought about it that way, or you know, whatever. And it's okay to be totally stressed out that I'm doing this thing, and there's something, you know, maybe look at it. Why is that happening? And so on. So I like that it's a conversation between the two of you, especially with some of your shared experiences and backgrounds and so on. Really probably enriches those conversations even more.
Yeah, we've heard from a lot of feedback. People really love our conversational style and how I've heard we have really great chemistry, which I believe, like, and Ginny's very funny. So we can talk about, you know, real serious things. I try here and there, but I think it's more you. But anyway, like, we bounce off of each other. So we'll talk about like serious things, and she'll say something, and then it'll spark this thought in me, and then I'll say something, and then we can come out of the depth with some levity and some humor, because a lot of the stuff we're talking about is deep, and people can only take so much of that, right? And we don't even plan it that way. It just happens. It's just sort of how we process things for ourselves, right?
Exactly.
So we try to be as honest and authentic as we can. We it's not scripted, but we definitely have some bullet points, because I like to make sure that, like, I definitely want to remember to say that, you know, but then that might bring us in a whole different direction, and we may not even hit some of those other points, you know. So it's very organic.
Yes.
And yeah, and talking about those things very often that people are thinking but don't really want to say. And Ginny and I just feel like we kind of have a knack for being able to do that in like a compassionate, loving, non-judgmental kind of way. Yeah. So it's doing really well so far. So we're putting out our 14th show this next week. It'll be on codependency.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we just did one on imposter syndrome. That was really, that was good. So yeah, and then episode 4 is on, I love, what's your purpose, you know? So it's kind of like stuff we're talking about here. It was like, how did we get to our purpose? So if you're, you know, listening to this and wondering, you know, what my purpose is, you know, what am I doing here? Like, I believe that we're all here on this earth for a specific mission for the world and for our own healing. You know, that's a good one to check out.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. Well,
I think a big part too for us was just, it was so therapeutic for the both of us during that difficult time of COVID.
Yeah.
We were very blessed with being able to have the connection with one another where it was a safe spot to talk about these feelings, to process them, to share in our journeys of, you know, sobriety. And I think getting the level of just therapeutic benefits out of the two of us talking it, we were sparked and reminded we all have the ability to do this with each other, but not when we're just completely divided and where we're in a situation that the fear is what is just dominating all the things. So for us, it was like, if we can do this, you know, this means that other people can get back to doing this as well. And we can all find healing if we can find a way to get past the fear of being able to even connect on these subjects and on these things.
Yeah.
That was a big part of what helped birth our podcast and our show and what keeps us going.
Sometimes even the fear of even bringing it up. I don't want to bring this topic up because I know I'm going to get pushback, or I fear I'm going to get pushback or something. So I'm just going to not talk about it. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When Ginny and I were first talking about this, I think I had said to her, like, maybe, you know, before we even, like, when we were having lunch that day and she showed me her little thing she did. I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could invite completely dissenting opinions on, like, bring somebody on? And I think maybe we'll do that. I don't know when. Because like Ginny said, we're still going to keep our format of just us. And I think every other week, then we'll have a guest on. So it might take a while to get there, but I would like to maybe bring somebody on who really believes the complete opposite of what we believe, specifically politically, and show how we really all just want the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
underneath it, like nobody's trying to hurt each other. Nobody's really, and it's all born of fear. We just want to be happy. We want to be healthy. We want to
Be
have a safe
stable.
space to live in. Like
Uh,
nobody's looking for anybody to go in and gun down children in a school, like to get that common vulnerability and that
Yes.
common desire to let people know that ultimately that's what we all want and that can connect us. So maybe we should focus on that instead of just the ways that we want to go about that is a little different.
Yeah, no, I
The
love
ways that we're disconnected. Right now it seems like it benefits not us, it benefits somebody when we are as disconnected as we are.
Yeah.
It doesn't benefit us well, but also knowing that there was a time and there can be a time again that none of us were meant to all think the same. That's not what the whole point
Exactly.
was here. And we don't learn by thinking the
Yes.
same and surrounding ourselves with people who think exactly like us, and that it is safe and it is okay. And you can still love somebody who's got completely different beliefs than you, because of the fact that their heart is beating and they're having a human experience just like you. And that ties us together.
Yeah.
In a big way.
And one of the things I love about that, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Bill Maher show. So I just watched the recent episode where he had Ron DeSantis on, I was like, what? Ron DeSantis is Bill Maher. Wow. It was a really good episode. If you haven't seen it, it's a good one to watch. But
Okay.
and one of the things I like about that type of show is that there's no yelling and screaming and you're stupid and name calling. It's just, two people, sometimes more, talking about something that they just don't agree on, right? They both are very passionate about them, but you can still have that conversation and you can still have that common ground where, again, like you mentioned, man, none of us want school shootings, but
Exactly.
the two different parts that are looking to solve that issue or their ideas of how to solve that issue are very different. And so how do we have that conversation in a way that shows us that we actually do have that common space? So I look forward to when you're doing that, because I love those types of shows where, again, it's not people screaming and yelling, it's people just talking.
Oh yeah.
Respecting each other and their opinions. And like I with my students, I have students that sometimes write papers on topics that I don't personally agree with. But I think, okay, well, you've presented what you've said and you've, given me citations or whatever. And it's okay, because that's your thought process. You didn't convince me otherwise, but great about this topic. And I love that. And I love the idea that we don't all think the same, and we don't want to all think the same. It's like we don't all look the same and that kind of thing. So it's kind of along those same lines. So I'm excited to have you guys move in that direction so I can hear it too. So
Thanks.
Awesome.
So do either of you have anything else you want to share before we end today? This has been a great talk with you both.
I don't really have anything else. Just, whatever feelings come up for you, just allow them, through your grief process. I assume your listeners have, grappled with grief and stuff. So just don't judge yourself. Try not to judge yourself, just accept whatever comes up and give yourself grace for whatever behaviors come out sideways, right? Anger or, fear or whatever, and trust that you're going to move through that's just a part of the whole process. And you'll be okay as long as you can find that willingness and then the courage to just go into whatever presents and know it's all there for a reason.
Yeah. Good advice.
Absolutely. I think, just to kind of piggyback on that, is to allow yourself to know and believe that some of this grief can be some of the most transformative, incredible space, even as it's terrifying while we're in it. And it might even bring everything to crumble around you at the time.
Yeah.
But to know that it has this just potent, intense, concentrated power to also be one of the most transformative experiences to help us grow into another level of ourselves that we could ever possibly go through, even if it's really, really scary while you're in it and things feel to be crumbling. It can be a huge catalyst. And that on the other side of it, we all have pretty amazing ability to transform into a phase of our life.
And you have to embrace that catalyst, I guess is how I'd say that. And I know many people in my life that, when they're new, something fresh and new for grief, they'll ask me, when am I going to feel like I used to feel? And the answer is never. You're not going to. you're a new person now. You have new experiences and new mindsets and new, I mean, both of you have shared, a lot of the different things that, changed in your the way of thinking and so on. And so I like to say that, well, first of all, I think we're all who we are because of our experiences in life. But I like to say that, I like who I am. So if it hadn't been for the experiences of my life, including those bad ones, I wouldn't be who I am today.
I agree.
Even though I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemy, still I had to work through it, and I learned a lot about myself and life in general. And I'm happy that's part of my legacy is my teaching and giving back to others and so on, because it's just so much you learn about yourself in those times of just, I don't know, bad times, whether it's whatever, going through whatever. So
yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both so much for being my guest today. I'm going to be listening to some of your episodes. I'm driving actually from the coast into Seattle after this, so I will listen to some podcasts on my way. So I was like,
nice.
3-hour drive, I'd like to listen to something interesting. So yeah, that'll be great. But thank you again.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Well, we're so glad to be here. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it, and thank you for allowing us to join you in your community here. And if y'all are out there, come check us out at Soul Rising. We're on all the platforms. We'd love to connect with you too. And thank you guys so much for having us in this community.
And we're going to post a link to your podcast as well as to Amanda's book when your episode airs too, so people can find you without having to do too much searching. So
thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate being here. It's an honor. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.